Today we're covering the subject of Thomas minis. The minis have a ton of different variations and paint schemes for each character in the range, but we're covering just 3 today. I've done a video on this subject before, but with the number of variants the minis range had, you can well imagine that I've barely scratched the surface so far. It's time to pick up my drawing pad and start creating illustrations. In the last video on this topic I illustrated Thomas, Percy and Toby, and so it only seemed logical to cover James for this video. Being one of the most popular characters in the whole franchise, it makes perfect sense that he has had a huge range of variants created for the minis toy line over the years. Picking one variant was a tough decision, but in the end I went with the King James variant, which seemed to be quite fitting for his character. I decided to add Duck to the image. I'm sure a lot of you could probably guess why. In fact, when I teased this image in as a community post, many people were not only able to correctly guess that King James was the focus of the illustration, but also why Duck was there. In the Railway series story Crossed Lines, Duck tells Donald that there was an engine on the Great Western Railway called King James I, but unlike James the Red Engine, he was a bit more humble and didn't swank about. Donald warns Duck not to tell James about him, since James would probably make their lives even more of a misery if he knew there was a king with his name. It seems that, by the events of this illustration, word about King James I had reached James. Perhaps Duck let it slip, or maybe Oliver brought him up in a conversation. Either way, it seems as though James is determined to keep the legacy of King James I alive and well, by going to the works and getting a royal makeover. The end result is rather fetching if you ask James, and quite garish if you asked anyone else. Far from keeping the legacy of James I alive, Duck believes that James is tarnishing that legacy. James has other ideas though. You can't expect people to care about an old king if you don't change things up a bit. There is a difference between changing things up and being disrespectful, James. There are 2 ways of doing things. If anything other than the Great Western Way is wrong, I don't want to be right, replied James cheerfully. It could be that Donald and Douglas are angry with Duck because they think he's the one who told James about his royal namesake, which doesn't make Duck feel any better about things. Maybe there's a story idea about Duck having to prove his innocence and finding out who really told James about King James. But that's another story. And with that, here is the finished drawing. Gordon, like James, has a wide variety of paint job variants in the minis range. The one I decided to focus on, however, was the graffiti variant, mainly because I thought it would make for a good picture. I was somewhat inspired by this famous illustration by Banksy, where some kids spray graffiti on Thomas's tank while he's asleep. Although I didn't want to just copy that image, and so I decided to set it inside the sheds and have Gordon reacting to what's happening rather than sleep through it all like Thomas did. I'm reminded of an old theory that is almost certainly not true, that Banksy's true identity is Neil Buchanan of Art Attack fame. Interestingly, Neil Buchanan has also drawn Thomas, as part of a piece drawn to coincide with the media merchants, the owners of Art Attack, being acquired by Ghislaine Entertainment. Unfortunately, I don't think you can use Neil and Banksy's Thomas drawings to compare drawing styles, since they both appear to copy existing artwork when drawing Thomas. I could only find a small picture of the Neil Buchanan Thomas piece, but he appears to have based it off of a magazine illustration, whereas the Banksy Thomas illustration is clearly based on the Thomas key art by Cotamundi Studios, which was being used everywhere at the time. But back to the illustration at hand. I'm not entirely sure how the kid managed to break into Tidmouth sheds to vandalise Gordon. Maybe they dug a hole under the ground or something. Or maybe one of the engine's drivers or firemen forgot to lock the doors. It's also amusing to think that, rather than use their graffiti skills to send out a political message or just go wild with something elaborate, they decide to spray Gordon's own name and number onto the side of him. Maybe they're worried that Gordon might forget his name and number if they're not sprayed on his side. I can't imagine that Gordon's driver and fireman would have much time to scrub the paint off in the morning, so either James or Henry would get the Express the next day, or possibly Gordon would have to pull the Express with a graffiti piece plastered on his side. I like to think that Thomas would make a joke about how Gordon should be grateful because now everyone knows his name and can't be confused for any other engine. I suspect that many tourists over the years have called him either Thomas or Edward, but now that he technically has a nameplate, he doesn't have to worry about that too much. But, with all that said, here is the completed illustration. And finally for today, we have Emily. The variant I went with was this one, where she's been done up to look like some sort of gingerbread biscuit. I just thought the toy looked quite nice. It seems quite unrealistic that an engine would be painted up like this, but none of the MINIS variant paint jobs are especially realistic, so I don't think we're breaking any new ground here. There is a biscuit factory on Sodor, although the only evidence of its existence is a story from the D'Agostini Thomas magazine. Nevertheless, there is nothing in the books or the TV series to suggest that there isn't a biscuit factory on Sodor, so as far as I'm concerned, it's canon. Maybe the Sodor Biscuit Company were experiencing a period of low sales and wanted to put together a publicity stunt that got people talking about their biscuits again. They spoke with the Fat Controller, who agreed to help them out with the advertising campaign. Emily agreed to take part in the event after the Fat Controller and the head of Sodor Biscuits ran it by with her, and she was repainted to look like a giant biscuit. A biscuit covered in sweets, no less. So it's possible that the Sodor Biscuit Company also produces sweets as well as biscuits. Sweets such as candy canes, round peppermint sweets. I think Emily's safety valve bonnet is supposed to resemble a gumdrop, or an American hard gum as they're known over here. Once Emily was repainted, filming of the adverts began. Emily travelled along the main line hauling a train of biscuit vans, and people all over the island came along to watch the train travel along the line, stopping to deliver biscuits at each station. Filming went smoothly, and the advert certainly received a lot of attention, not least due to Emily's striking paint scheme. Emily was glad she could help out, but was still happy about being repainted back into her normal colours. And so, here is the completed drawing. And there we are, 3 more MINIS variants illustrated in the style of the show. It's been nice revisiting this topic, and I wanted to make sure these drawings were as good as they could be, hence why this video was delayed slightly. There are so many variants in the MINIS toy line that I can't imagine this video being the last, so be on the lookout for more like this in the future. In the meantime, definitely consider subscribing to the channel, as well as liking, sharing and commenting on the video.